Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Analytic Stories today. I'm super happy to have Laura Patterson with us. Hey, Laura, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Laura because there are a lot of great things to say, but I'm just going to give you some highlights here to get you guys ready for our conversation. So she began her career about the same time I did, about 25 years ago, and she was in sales. And she's really moved to work in a lot of different areas, CRM, customer relationship management, for those of you who don't know that acronym, product marketing, analytics, and marketing operations. And she is running a company called VisionEdge Marketing today for over 20 years, which is amazing to be working in this space for so long, because I'm sure she's seen a lot of changes. And I'm always impressed to see that people have a patent. So she's got a patent in a methodology called excellence. And that takes an incredible amount of work. So, congratulations on having that. And I think that'll probably come up in our chat today. And to go along with the patent, she's only written 4 books. And the latest one is called Fast Track Your Business, a customer-centric approach to accelerate market growth. And we're going to talk about growth today. And Lauren and I know each other. We met many years ago at probably was called eMetrics. Now it's called Marketing Analytics Summit. So it's been a while. And she's been recognized as a top 50 woman in marketing technology, top 20 women in business to the Sales Lead Management Association. And so we've got a great person with us today, and we are all going to learn a lot. So thank you again, Laura. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, you did a great job, and they don't want to hear about me. Let's talk about things that they do want to hear about.
It helps. I always think it helps people really tune in, like, all right, here's what we're going to get to. All right, so let's get into the fun here. Now, in your latest book, you introduce a framework, and I love frameworks because that's, a big part of what I do, called the Circle of Traction. Almost makes me think of the Lion King, I think. So when you start working with a client, what's one thing you find yourself recommending that helps them start to gain traction? And whether that takes a few weeks, maybe even just a few days. So that's kind of part one. And what have you seen happen that can cause them to lose traction?
This is a great question. And I think it might be helpful. I'll talk a little bit about the circle of traction in a moment, but I want to just set our stage. You and I have been at this a long time. If you wind back the clock to an earlier period, we had less data than we have today. Today, there is no shortage of data. In fact, companies are rich in data. But when you think back to our early days, Lee, and you wind that clock back, one of the things we know is that we made a lot of decisions based on the limited amount of data that we had. Sure. And in some ways, I think we made better and faster decisions than we do today, because we didn't have to boil the ocean and we didn't have to wade through so much data. We could only do based on what we had. Yeah. And I think that is really important to this conversation. So I hear from a lot of companies that want to be more customer-centric, that want to grow and want to make data-derived decisions. I always start with, well, what is the one decision you think you need to make now, in this quarter, in the next 6 months, this year, and what do you need to know to make that decision? Because that allows them to get focused. This is where I think is the biggest place, most important place to start. What is the success going to look like, and how will you know you've achieved it? And let's see if we can put that in customer terms, because a lot of companies that talk about growing, they talk about it in terms of revenue, right? And I'm sure you've had this conversation.
Sure, right. But we need to grow 5%.
Yeah, or a percentage. But that doesn't mean anything, right? Because we don't know how to connect that. We have to connect that to the people we serve, which is customers. So that takes us back to the circle of traction is which customers do you need to keep? What customers do you need to acquire? how many, from where, right? These kinds of questions is with a starting point. It's also where they struggle the most. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, right? You got to know what you need to know. You have to understand what success is in order to grow. And yet the place that they tend to falter the most is that they don't know what decisions they even sometimes need to make. They just are off racing to a number, right? And as a result, they often just become opportunistic, right?
Short term.
Yes, yeah. and short term. So I hope that answered that question a little bit.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with a handful of those things you said are really have so much depth to them, right? The first one is the issue about the amount of data we have, right? There's that old study, the paradox of choice, right? And that, given too much choice, too many options, you actually start to lose the ability to make a decision. And I do think that's that question you ask, and that's actually something very similar to what I do with my customers in the process we use is trying to get into, you have so much data, so what? Imagine I could give you what you want, and imagine that it looks amazing. We create some beautiful visuals for it. What is it you're actually really trying to do with it? What are you trying to understand? And a lot of times they don't have a great answer because either they're used to being kind of vague, or they're used to this, I'm just hoping to see something in the data, right? And it's not really targeted. It's just kind of this general, well, we're going to have people do analysis and we'll see something, we'll get some insight, but who knows if that's really worthwhile. So I see this struggle all the time, and I'm not sure why the discipline has kind of waned so much. And it could get worse with, moving towards people's hope that, it's all going to be machine learning and AI, and I won't have to think again. It's just going to do it for me. And I think that's wrong too, because it doesn't necessarily know the best answer. It can provide, I think, better guidance maybe, but I'm not sure we're at the stage where we're going to relinquish our decision making, when we can't even make decisions when we have, good information, let alone just handing it off to a computer. So I think there's a lot we have to deal with.
I hope we don't do that. I hope that we use the tools, right? It's a tool to help us do a better job, maybe a faster job, but not replace the job. And, I've had this conversation with you and other people, and I've often told that story about my father, who was a handyman and loved to do projects in his workshop, and how as a small child, I would go to the hardware store with him. And one day I was in the hardware store. Back then it was an Ace Hardware. We didn't have all these big hardware stores. We didn't have Lowe's and Home Depots. Right. They were just little neighborhood stores. And I ran across this piece of equipment. I probably was 5 or 6 years old. And I remember tugging on his arm and saying what a cool tool it was. It turned out it was some kind of saw, like a bandsaw or something like that. One of those monster type of tools.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget my father saying this, and people have heard me tell this story. He said, "That's a really cool tool. But here's the thing. If you really don't know how to use a tool, you don't know how to do the job, and you don't know how to use the tool, then you'll only do damage faster." So yeah. I think that's kind of, we got to be careful about AI and machine learning from that point of view, which is why you see all these articles on AI ethics and all these other things, because people are saying, hey, there's potential risks here we need to be thinking about if we just choose to abdicate our ability to be in charge, our ability to be in control.
Well, I see some of that today too. I mean, actually, I've seen it for a long time in the kind of the field that I spend more of my time in, when you're looking at visualization, and the tools that have come out over the years have made working with larger amounts of data very easily, and then creating the visuals behind them. But when people, as you said, don't really know how to use the tool the right way, they're creating damage. So you get people who are just blasting through large databases, creating lots and lots of charts and visuals and publishing them and filling up more servers with that stuff. And people, the users, you talked about the customer before, connecting it to the customer, don't really know what to do with it. So there's all this stuff, and it's actually kind of almost hurting the practice because people are like, that stuff isn't helping me at all. And then they just go back and into Excel or something. And, you've spent millions of dollars on all this new software that kind of just goes to waste.
I bet you've been in a few garages where you saw some tools gathering dust.
Mostly mine. Yeah, I have that.
So, yes. So we've covered tools and frameworks, and I'm with you. I think frameworks are extremely valuable. I think they're really important for lots of different reasons. And as one of the things that I think they do is they facilitate business continuity, because we are all intellectual capital, right? As knowledge workers, we're intellectual capital. And when we leave, we leave, that intellectual capital walks out the door. Right. So if you don't have frameworks in place for your organization, then as new talent comes on board, which may be really, really smart, but not experienced, right? Really smart, lots of energy. So lots of things, you want to make sure they have good frameworks to leverage that they know how to use so that they can do the job that is being vacated by someone who has lots and lots of experience and has all that intellectual capital, which takes us back to the circle of attraction very quickly. So it is a framework. It's a framework we created 20 plus years ago, and we use with our customers. And it's basically a wheel, and it takes people through a process of how to accelerate traction in the marketplace, with a customer-centric lens, and how to really use marketing, upstream marketing, as an engine of growth. That's really what the circle of attraction is designed to do. And we have been using it with a lot of customers, and a few customers have said to me, it would be really great if you had some way to document that framework. Mm-hmm. And so as I sat down to start documenting the framework, lo and behold, it became this book, right? It just evolved into that. And so that's what we have today. And we share it with that, we want people to have frameworks, whether it's ours or someone else's or one like you have, or whatever it is that you need in your business, because that's what allows you to have business continuity, which I think all of us over the last year have come to realize is really important.
Well, yeah, that's for that. Yeah, in many ways, yeah, that's definitely a good point. I hadn't actually thought about that. So why do you think people, in our work, because if you look at other parts of a company, finance, IT, marketing, almost, operations, most of them have some type of a framework that they use. Balance sheets, software development lifecycle, you can go on through that list.
NPD, stage gate, keep going.
Yeah. So why is there such a lack or maybe resistance on our side in analytics space to have those kinds of things?
Well, that's a really good question. And I've only been on the science side of marketing. I mean, I've worked with a lot of creative agencies and firms. And by the way, they have frameworks too, right? They almost all of them do. I'm not sure. And I think we do have frameworks. I think that the biggest challenge we have today in every profession is everyone's in a hurry. There's a lot, the pace is pretty intense, and things want things faster. And so rather than investing in really building something and leveraging a framework, they just think they can put a tool in and that will do the job, and then people will run the tool. And I think that we've run into that with analytics, wanting to be able to crunch all the data and turn it into something faster. So maybe I'm just speculating. I have no data to support this hypothesis. So, but it would be an interesting thing. I mean, we have everyone talking about how important it is to have data-derived insights, to make data-driven decisions, to have a data culture. I mean, we're talking about that and have been talking about that for years now. But to do that well, you really do have to have frameworks.
Yeah, the whole point, ironically, I guess, to what you're saying, of a framework is to actually make things go faster, because you're reducing the repetition or rework, right? You're trying to have something from that kind of, like you said, continuity, consistency on how you do things. So thinking that you're going to bypass it because it doesn't go fast enough is actually the opposite of what usually happens when you're working with a process like that. So let's talk a little bit about that, issue in a little more detail, because, as I mentioned, I have Design to Act, which is a framework, right? And you have this excellence framework that you talked about a little bit. So I'm wondering if you can, we can get to some a little bit harder examples, about maybe when you've been working with clients to implement your framework, but they did have that discomfort, and to say, look, I'm not going to adopt this, or I'm uncomfortable with certain pieces of it. And maybe you're like, hey, this isn't going to shake out with this company. They're not going to be able to do it. So what do you think what were you seeing there that maybe had them feel that way about certain parts of it? And then how did you help them work their way past it? Because I think this is something that everybody faces, and it's not usually technical issues, right? You mentioning, culture,
exactly.
People.
It's not a technical issue. Exactly. So Lee, this is a great question. So what Excellence does, it is a framework that helps companies connect the work and investments of marketing to business results. That's essentially what it does. And there are some tools out there, which we won't spend any time advertising those, that attempt to do that. But one of the biggest challenges, and where they miss the mark, is that, that saying from Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand, again, what bets does the company need to make? What hills does the company need to take? What does that look like? Where are they? And what customers do you have to have, right? You have to know this before you start racing off and building, let's use marketing, a plan on what content you're going to write, what you're going to do to your website, what's your keywords for SEO, let's make some videos, right? Before what webinars are we going to go to? What trade shows are we going to
fill in the list of things.
Yes, so they create a list of things and they put a budget around that. Maybe they put some measures around that and they think they have a plan. What Excellence does is say, no, you don't really have a plan. You have a list and a cost, right? It's like you have a list and a cost and maybe some dates, right? You don't have a plan. You have a list. And so Excellence really is about, yes. And I think this is where I run and try to help people understand, just because you took the list you wrote, maybe in a PowerPoint or in a project manager, and you dumped it into a planning tool, doesn't mean you have a plan, right? You just have your list look prettier, kind of like data visualization a little bit, right? Didn't change what the data says. It just made the data look so you can look at it differently. Right. That's all. So it requires starting with the end in mind. And that means you need to know, as a marketer, what the business needs to do to declare success. And many marketers don't know the answer to that question. You can't create a plan if you don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
And the second question they need to know the answer to is, how will we do this? How will we do this? There's your strategy. And they don't know how we will do this. Then finally, what is it you want marketing to do to move the needle or move the ball down the field, right? And then lastly, how will you know that marketing did? And until you know those four things, you can't really write a marketing plan. So Excellence starts with those kinds of questions and helps you build that out. And to do this right, it usually takes a shift inside the organization. And that's really what we're helping companies do to grow, is make some shifts. And the shift is usually one or all of these three things. First, it's a shift in thinking. Like, it's a how you think.
Yeah, for sure.
A shift in how you think. Because it's definitely chopped down, not here's all the trade shows that we need to go to this next year.
Yeah.
Here's all the content we want to create. Here's our content calendar. Here's our event calendar. Here's our social media calendar.
Yeah, those are just tactics.
Those are just tactics. So you have to make a shift in thinking. Then often the second shift is a change in what kind of data you're going to look at. Because we're so used to looking at different data sets in a different way. So it's going to take a change in the kind of data you're going to look at. And potentially that data might even be primary research requirements. And so many companies have forgotten that that's a key part of data. It's like, I can just go dig it out of my CRM system or my marketing automation tool or inside Google Analytics or in my social media platform or whatever it is, right? But that's not the same as actually conducting research and answering a question. And then the third shift is understanding what you're really measuring, right? So usually change, those are the shifts that have to occur. And depending on the company and depending on the situation, it could be one or more of these kinds of things that makes the organization uncomfortable, right? It creates dissonance because it's an uncomfortable feeling, right? And so you've got to have a culture that encourages experimentation, right? That it's okay to try something. So cultures that are risk avoidant, really hard.
Tough.
Right?
Yeah.
Really tough. So you got to have a culture that embraces experimentation, a culture that believes that data is an asset, it's truly an asset in the organization. So if it's just, if they don't really see their data as an asset, that's a challenge. But they recognize that they need help in upskilling their teams because usually the people that are on these teams don't think this way. If they did, you wouldn't need people like you and me, right? And then usually also it requires a balancing act of flying and fueling at the same time because you can't stop what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
While you do this. So that for many organizations is very frightening that we have to fly and fuel at the same time. And so fear,
we're busy already. How are we going to do this too?
Right. Yes, the notion of being busy. That old saying, I'm too busy chopping wood to sharpen my axe, right?
Right.
But, so fear, fear is often the biggest hurdle or obstacle for many organizations. And, there's an old saying, and I wish I could figure out who said it, but right action cannot flow from fear. Right? So people have to just...
That fear is usually, I think, not necessarily real fear. It's either inherited in the organization or it's just something that somebody made up, because I run into that a lot. And someone, it's always something like, I can't say that. We don't do it that way. My boss wants it this way. You could fill in the blank with all these things that are fear related, right? Because they say that because they're like, well, I can't do that means if I do that, I'll probably get in trouble, right? That's how I always interpret that. And I usually challenge them back and say, everything from really, just kind of like that, to why can't you say that to your boss or the CEO or whoever it's going to be? And a lot of times people, they don't have a good answer, right? They don't have anything concrete. And it's just something it's just so deep in how people are behaving that you have to really go in and break that up, because otherwise they're never going to get to that next, like you said, though, they can't change. If there's
change is hard, right? Change is hard. So you have to have, and it's about the lens you put on. So when we look at data, obviously we're looking at that data with a lens in order to analyze it, in order to figure out what it's telling us. And you probably are familiar with that post we talked about that I wrote, I can't remember when, on non-obvious data, right? Looking for at the things that are not obvious to you, because the obvious is obvious, but really being, right, that lens, being able to separate foreground from background and really understand when you really have a pattern. These are all take lenses to do that. And so the lenses that we wear, they dictate how we move, how we interact, and how we navigate our world. So I just had a conversation with someone quite recently about failure. They wanted me to talk about failures. And I said, first of all, I try really hard not to frame things as a failure, because most things are not failures. I said, why don't you try framing them as experiments?
Yeah.
If you're in the world of Agile, you try something and then you iterate, and the goal is to iterate quickly, right? This is what allows companies to be nimble. So embrace the notion of an experiment, and what can we learn from that, and how do we iterate rapidly? And if you do that, then maybe you won't think about failure. And the other thing is, try to think about how you parlay or play to people's strengths. You have a team, right? Mm-hmm. What is it really good at doing? And play to their strengths. Don't set them up to fail. So these are conversations I've been having with some C-suite people lately. And it all starts with leadership. It is really about the leadership of any organization. Yeah,
they have to set the tone. I always love that saying about failure, because, right, Edison said, I didn't fail 10,000 times in making the light bulb. I just found 10,000 ways it didn't work, right? It's the same thing, Yes. He just said, that one doesn't work, that one doesn't, and finally got to it. And he was a pretty good inventor. He knew a few things, so we could model after him a little bit.
I agree with you. And I love that quote. That's a great quote. And it's the same idea. Experiment. It's okay to experiment. And if you can frame things as an experiment, hey, to your boss, if you're someone who doesn't feel like you can be more bold than that, be more courageous, and then say, look, I'd like to try an experiment. I used to do that a lot when I worked at Motorola. I was there 14 years, and I was bold enough, maybe stupid and bold, I don't know, to say, hey, I want to try this experiment. And, understanding and speaking the language of the business, in that world, one of the things that the company typically spent a lot of money on and iterated was mask sets, right? Mask sets in the semiconductor space. So I would say, look, it's just the cost of one mask set. We experiment on those all the time. Just give me the cost of one mask set as an experiment. And they could get that, right? So, think about the language of business that, you're working in, as people who are listening to this. How can you frame an experiment in a way that the leadership team recognizes they experiment all the time, right? They should let you experiment occasionally. That's a
great idea. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a really good idea.
And then for the leaders, and I think I was really fortunate in my career, Lee. I had so many great mentors and bosses. But the leaders also need to be able to say to someone, it's an experiment, go try. What's the worst that can happen, right? And, we had sort of rules for our experiments by our leaders. Do no harm. The number one thing, the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. Whatever you're going to do, as long as it doesn't do any harm to the company, to employees, to customers, partners, right? The supply chain, do no harm. That's the number one mandate. Other than that, it's not illegal. It's not unethical. It's not amoral. These were the basic rules.
Hopefully people know those parts, yeah.
But. Yes, but basically those were the rules that we were given. Those were our operating parameters. That gives you a tremendous amount of freedom, right, to experiment. And
a lot of places don't have that, so that's a problem. So now, speaking of a lot of places, maybe this will be a good jump into the last thing I want to ask you about. This is a little bit less maybe deep. Onerous type question. Yeah, a little bit less deep. All right.
We got a little deep there.
Yeah, we did. So now, but we may end up right back in it. So
pull the plane up.
Now I know one of the other things that we've talked about is, just that idea of growth, and you mentioned that early on, like I just want to grow 5% or 10%, but what does that mean? Now, imagine you talked about being in the hardware store. So imagine you're doing a little bit of yard work down in Texas because you want to make your garden. I can really
imagine that after our snowstorm. Not hard to imagine.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully no more snow for you guys for a while. We'll take it up here in the north. So you're doing some yard work. You want to get your garden to grow, but you're digging, but you don't strike oil, but you uncover an old horseshoe. So you're cleaning this off, and a genie comes out of the horseshoe. And I know this is the real world, right? She says, Laura, now that I am free to ride again, I will grant you 2 wishes. One for yourself, and one for all the data users across the world. Of course, that's what a genie would say. So the genie clicks her spurs and tells you to make your wishes. What do you say?
I'm really grateful for the finding this genie. So I would say to the data users, I would ask her to, so I believe that data users need to be insight creators. And so I would say to the genie, my wish would be for you, genie, to enable all these data users to have instant skills for gleaning relevant and meaningful insights from their data. That's what I would wish for them.
Wow.
Right?
It's a big wish.
The big wish. So we'll have to, I have no idea what the ripples will be to that, but I'm sure there will be major ripples. I can only imagine all these data users walking around with insights, and I just try to envision what that might look like in the world. And there's got to be a comic strip for that.
Insights and asking to do experiments to see if their insights are practical.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess for me, at this point in my life, I would say to her, I just want more time. Just time, right? Make more time for me. Because for me, time is the most precious asset I have now, right?
Yeah.
Time is not something you can store. You can't make more of it. You can't borrow it. You can't give it away. Once it's gone, it's not, it's not retrievable. It's not replaceable. So time, if the genie could give me more time, I think that would be my request, my wish.
So what would you do with the time?
Well, my husband would say I'd probably just be working more, but I don't know. I think I would find ways to do other things with my time. The journey on, as I have told people before, I'm not Aristotle, Da Vinci, Galileo, or anybody that's going to leave this huge legacy that's going to be, hundreds of years from now. So the legacy I have is the people I'm on the journey with. So I guess it would be able to be with more people, and maybe that became more evident in this last year, just how important it is to be able to be with people. Not that this isn't a great opportunity, but to be with people.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think we're all, and as we get closer, we're thinking about those kinds of things. Although I think, not to digress too much from that idea, but I definitely think the time we've gone through has created this, desire for data in many ways, and brought data to the forefront for just the everyday user. I mean, we're not seeing it as much now, at least here, because things have, settled down a little bit. But right, I mean, for 9 months, all you would see on TV were charts and curves and people talking about growth rates and whatever it was, right? And you couldn't get away from it in many ways. And so hopefully, maybe it, just like I saw that more kids want to be doctors now, and enrollments in medical school is probably going to go up. That maybe this will cause more kids to want to be into data and see that as a field, and understand the impact that it can have, right? And because you can, like we say, even in the business world, right? You can use data for good, or you can use it for bad. And I think we saw it kind of even go both ways recently. So, yeah, it's that idea of time and people. And so just to close out that thought, I'm just curious. So to give people all that skill, is there anything in particular that you think, that if you could dish out those skills, what would be kind of the first thing you'd want people to be able to do on that learning path?
So I think in order for them to be successful at that, they have to be good critical thinkers. And I think that's a skill that is potentially lacking right now. I would say start there. And we just published our post on LinkedIn on being a critical thinker. I think we need to get back to people being able to be good critical thinkers. And I don't think that our educational system is doing a good job of that. One of the things I said last year in a conversation is good analysts know when it's time to call a flag on the play, right? Mm-hmm. There was some data going around, and it's their job. A good analyst needs to step up and say, I don't think you're looking at that data right. you've got a confirmation bias or whatever you want to call it in your data. So good analysts should be able to do that, and that takes critical thinking. So I think that's one skill. And the other is another post, Lee, I know you're going to appreciate coming out if it hasn't already. Probably maybe will by the time this is live. Is understanding the difference between logic and math. Right. So we have a lot of people that maybe are getting fairly good at math, are letting machines do math, but that's not the same as logic. And I think that's a skill that human beings need to get better at. And we need to get really much better at it before we turn machines loose on thinking that they are logical.
Yeah.
So I would say I'd start with those two. I'd unpack those two things, critical thinking and, building really strong logic skills. I don't know if they even teach logic in school anymore. I've been away from school for so long. I think that maybe in the old days they had one class somewhere in school, but yeah.
That's it. Yeah, those and those two things probably have a lot of connections in them too. Well, maybe if you become a computer programmer, it gives you some logic versus math, but got to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So this is great. I know we kind of, like you said, we got deep, we got high, up there. So I think we covered a lot of great ground and really some things for people they can think about for their organizations, which is really always the goal that I hope for, is that we can get to some points that people can feel like, we're not giving them all the answers that they need, but some things where we can point them to consider some changes. And I think that as we get back to doing things in a different way now, people may be open to things like experimentation more, or how they communicate, or reinstilling some of these ideas, because shouldn't just be jumping back into the way we did things before. So some of the things that you've brought up, I think there's probably some chance that we'll see that happening. So Laura, thanks so much for being with us today and for your time and sharing your ideas. And I look forward to catching up again soon.
Like that. My pleasure. And thanks for having me, Lee.
Absolutely. So long, everybody. See you next time.